Coming up, we'll take a look at updates to the SharePoint Framework with the introduction of new SharePoint Framework extensions that give you richer customization options, including a banner at the top of the page to support site metadata and notification scenarios for your SharePoint team sites, adding actions and custom fields within SharePoint lists, and we'll show how you can harness Microsoft Flow along with your custom business logic to automate business processes and incorporate Office 365 data using the Microsoft Graph API. Finally, we'll compose sophisticated user experiences using connected web parts. The SharePoint Framework lets you create engaging SharePoint pages by building modern web parts using open frameworks and your preferred tools, such as React, Sass, Gulp, and more. Since the general availability of the SharePoint Framework in February, we've seen some really fantastic web parts. And coming later this year, you can use these web parts in on-premises environments with Feature Pack 2 for SharePoint Server 2016. Today, we're going to go beyond web parts. We're expanding the SharePoint Framework with extensions to support new site and app customization scenarios that will be available in SharePoint Online. These SharePoint extensions let you do more across SharePoint sites, including adding custom metadata, customizing the presentation of list views, and extending the command surfaces of SharePoint. Now, in this example, my company, Contoso Adventure Clothing, has an upcoming training class for beginning rafting. For each class, we have a group and a site. Now you'll notice that this site has the details around the training event right at the top, always in context for view. It includes the level, an associated logo, and a mini-map that shows the location where the event is taking place. This metadata is being pulled from a central repository. Let me show you how you can use SharePoint extensions to help you deliver this branded custom team site experience. Now here I am in Visual Studio Code. Now of course you can use the editors of your choice. SharePoint Framework lets you customize with modern JavaScript many facets of the SharePoint experience. Here I have an extensions folder on the right-hand side, and what I'm going to do is drill into this component we have called training list header. Now within this component, you can see that this is derived from something called a base application customizer. A base application customizer lets me register custom script within the site, and from there I can use it to override certain placeholders that are well chosen within the page. Now scrolling down to the render function, you can see that I'm going to go find that placeholder using context.placeholders. I'm going to look for the page header. I'm going to make sure it's valid and not null. And then finally, I'm going to instantiate a React component, which will actually have the real rendition for this element. Now going to my actual React component here, you can see that this training list header is really just a simple set of markup that will take the data that I'm retrieving from a custom web service and render it in line. So that's a brief overview of the application customizer. Coming back to the site, you can now understand how it was built. Let's take a look at a different scenario and focus on list customization. In our case, for each of these training sites, we have a list of attendees. Now, sometimes these lists can be viewed in public settings, so we want to ensure that for each of these lists, they're always private, and we hide personal details from folks who might be peering over our shoulders, unless the instructor specifically looks at them. Now, this is my standard list. It's got details like phone numbers and emergency contacts and emails, and that's not what we want to show. Now, to implement the privacy customization, we can use a field customizer to modify the presentation of the fields, and in this case, add a blur effect until the instructor mouses over to reveal the data. Now, this is just our scenario for Contoso, but you can imagine many other types of list visualizations you might want to implement. Also, the header we just built now displays an additional warning to the viewers of the site to keep confidential information private. So let me show you the code. Now here I have another folder called Privacy Shield, which has this list field customizer customization. I'm going to select the Privacy Shield field customizer class, and just like that base application customizer that you saw earlier, it derives from a base class which has all of our functions and utilities. Now specifically, there's a method called onRenderCell, and what I'll do here is simply override and use a React component to display that blur effect. That's contained inside of privacyshield.tsx. And here you can see very simply that if we should show private data, in other words, if the user has their mouse hovered over, we'll render it with a regular style. Otherwise, we'll use a blurred CSS style to give it that blurred effect. So that's the field customizer, another new SharePoint extension type. Again, you can use it to implement many of your own desired list customizations. Now let's go up a level to our main training manager site. We're a store manager, and we want to see and manage a list of training courses. We have a simple process where people can approve and open up a class for external attendees to register. I've added this custom action called Open this class to the public to the menu. We've added a new SharePoint Framework extension type called Command Set, which implements and adds this capability for you to add those custom actions. Now, as you can see here, when I click the action, It'll give me some brief detail about the class and what the presentation will look like for incoming visitors. And if I'm interested in opening the class up, I'll just click the Open Class Up button, and this will update a SharePoint list item. Now let me show you the code behind this. So again, I have another SharePoint Framework extension folder within my project. I'm going to expand class commands, and I'm going to go show you this JSON object, which returns all of the metadata about my custom actions. I've got an open class action right here with a title and an icon, and it's got an identifier. Now within my code, I've implemented this onExecute class where I'm going to have the actual implementation of my open class dialog. It's going to, again, instantiate a React component to implement my dialog. So here I have my dialog React component, which actually renders out that dialog. What it does is it pulls in information from the SharePoint list to present a view of the list item as the user would see it when they register their class. So again, standard React components here, easy to integrate data. Now, what this has done is actually update a list item with a new status. Now, as that list item changes, I can integrate custom behaviors. I could build a webhook, or I can integrate workflows. One option is Microsoft Flow, which has new integrations into Office 365. Specifically, you can see here that as an end user, I've added a number of different notification behaviors as things change inside of the SharePoint list and as that status becomes available. Now, what I can do in addition is add custom code to this using a custom flow action. So in my particular case, I want to make sure that when this item is intended to be published, we update our training management system with this new data. So I'm going to add an action here. I'm going to call it publish to training system, which is a custom action I had previously registered that connects to an Azure function. Now let me show you the Azure function. Recently, we've updated our Microsoft Graph endpoints for lists, and they provide a great way to actually go and access list data within your SharePoint site. Now this is standard web request semantics. I'm going to add some headers, and then I'm going to parse the response that I get back. Now in my case, for our custom learning management system, we store all the data in Azure Storage. So here I'm using some Azure Storage simple objects to push that data up to the site. So that's a little bit of how you can build custom actions using Azure Functions and plugging into Flow. Now finally, new improvements to SharePoint Framework make it possible to build even richer user experiences. SharePoint now supports web part connections that let you create web parts that can work together to achieve more sophisticated user experiences. Now let's take a look at this experience on my phone inside of the SharePoint app. One of the biggest benefits of SharePoint Framework is that it's designed and supports responsive, mobile-friendly experiences from the start. Now here's a list web part which will display all of our outdoor activity classes, and it shows some very basic details of the class. Now beneath this part, I have a detailed web part which shows enhanced information about a particular class. This web part automatically connects to the outdoor activity list to show and bring in those details. So all of this is pulled in through the Microsoft Graph. Now let me show you the code. I've got some web parts listed below in my SharePoint Framework project, and specifically I have a training detail web part. Now within this component, I have a specific line of code basically allows me to get the set of events and information and updates from that training list part. Specifically, I'm using this event aggregator class, and I'm registering for this specific item selected event. Now, in addition, I'm also updating the user information, and to do that, I'm going to call into Microsoft Graph. Now, Microsoft Graph lets you get a world of Office 365 information, including calendar appointments, and files, and tasks. Now here, I'm just getting some specific profile information. I'm going to use the Graph HTTP client to call this particular endpoint with details about a particular user, and then I'm going to update my React state with those details and display that custom instructor information. So that's a little bit of using SharePoint Framework with web part connections and Microsoft Graph to build really powerful user experiences. I hope today's overview on our latest SharePoint Framework updates with extensions helps you imagine new ways to customize your sites and apps within the SharePoint modern experiences, and then automate activities through Microsoft Flow and the Microsoft Graph API. Now you can start using SharePoint Framework today to start building web parts. We'll be releasing a preview of SharePoint extensions with a developer framework soon, so stay tuned. To learn more, you can visit us at dev.office.com/SharePoint. Thanks for watching.